All right, well, we're into our third week, and we have not yet met a judge. But today we will meet four of them. And you'll notice that the subtitle of our weekly lesson is When Rest Was Still Possible. Of course, there's a lot that is behind the biblical text. And this was a period of history. The Israelites entered the Promised Land, and we've already learned that they did a fairly good job under Joshua, but he didn't finish the job, and the tribes were supposed to pick things up and drive out all the Canaanites, which they did not do. And just like an awful lot of people, myself included, when something is no longer urgent, we let it slide. I told you at one time that the period of the judges is, from a biblical point of view, at least 300 years, give or take some, long. If you don't take the Bible seriously and you feel you can change it and edit it, they try to squash it down to about 150 years. But let's assume that the Bible is correct. And therefore, we're dealing with a period of about 300 years. Well, today, believe it or not, we're going to zip through 200 years. Now, just imagine if the last 200 years of American history was summarized in about a chapter and a half. Clearly, we're only seeing snatches of what went on. As a biblical scholar and someone who just loves the Holy Land and the history of God's people, I would summarize it like this. In culture worldwide, the world was moving from something called the Bronze Age into the Iron Age. Now, it's a technology they're talking about. In the book of 1 Samuel, we find out that the Israelites did not have iron weapons. They were still in the Bronze Age. And if you had iron weapons like the Philistines, you had a definite tactical advantage. We've already heard about chariots. Chariots had come in during this time, and chariots were the battle tanks of the ancient world, and if you had them, you definitely had the upper hand militarily. When the Israelites did not finish the job, they hunkered down in the highlands, on the hills, and in the central valleys. But in the summary that we had last week, we find out they did not take those key towns that were down in the plains or along the seashore or in the broader valleys. Who lived there? The Canaanites. And who did the Canaanites interact with primarily? The Egyptians. The Egyptians didn't care about the hillbillies. So the Israelites created their villages, and archaeology shows that from about 1400 before Christ to about 1200 before Christ. You have all these little villages all over the place, but you don't have the kind of culture that is clear from the time of David and Solomon, somewhat later. Now it's this period of village life that the book of Judges gives us just a snatch. Today we are going to have 4 judges after not having any. One of them is going to be a verse long. That sure doesn't tell you too much. And the first judge is a little longer than that, but he too is, you might say, rather sketchy. The key word in all of this is that at the end of these 4 judges, the Bible says the land had rest. And then it specified a multiple of 40 years. The first one was 40, the second one was 80, the third one is 40. You get the picture. Now, I don't want to get anybody edgy, but we use numbers differently today. We have to always keep that in mind. If your Social Security number is one number off, you don't get your money. Correct? How many of you know it by heart? Ho, 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 ho. I guess I do too. Now, how many of you know your bank number by heart? Oh, fewer. Well, there are a lot of numbers I just put in a little notebook and forget about. So numbers have that precision today. We wouldn't have put a man on the moon if numbers were rather general. But you know, general numbers are not unusual. They're part of our literature. What's a baker's dozen? 13. No, it's a dozen. You see, you knew that because it's part of our way of looking at things. That's an interesting thing too, because the Bible has a lot of 12s. But when you look at it, given a different setting or different context, you got 13. Because the Joseph tribe split in two, and then the Levites became people who served God's house of worship. And so depending upon what list you draw up, you have 12 or 13. Get it? All right, this is at work here too. 40 years in Egypt. Egypt was like France during the time of Louis XIV, or like England was in the last century under Victoria. Sort of the standard for the way you express things. And the Egyptians looked upon 40 as the extraordinary blessing of a pharaoh or a father. If you could, you actually had a festival for that when you hit that. We don't celebrate our 40th anniversary, or do we? 50. Well, that's because we live longer now. But this is part of the story. Now, when the Bible says the land had rest, that means that because of God's grace, He didn't allow the people of the hills, the hill country, the hill folk, the Israelites, to have constant warfare. There was warfare, and we're going to hear about an invader from the far north. We're going to hear about an invader from the Canaanite coalition. We're going to hear about an invader from the little country of Moab. And they would oppress Israel. They would make things difficult for a period of years. And then God would raise up a judge. And the Bible makes it very clear. Why did God send these oppressors? Well, you know the answer. Moses was long ago and in distant memory, and all around us we got these idol worship places where the girls are beautiful and religion is connected with sexuality, and that is basically the bane of the time of the judges. Now, I told you we're going to be over 200 years we're going to cover today in one lesson. And yet we're talking about the life and times of the judges. We have a lot more to talk about. All right. When rest was still possible, because one of the things you can't escape as you read the book of Judges is that when it gets to the end of the book, it's not that the writer was tired, but the judges did not establish rest for the land. It couldn't anymore. Things were falling apart. Because of the spiritual weakness, God allowed, you might say, the country to fragment. And only when King David came do we hear that term again spoken, the land had rest. Okay, shall we launch into it? Here are our judges for today. Number one, you can see it's in the southern part of the country. And somebody already asked me, how do you pronounce that? We can say Othniel if you like that. That's the way I said when the King James was my Bible. But when I lived in Israel for a while, I learned that that's to be pronounced Othniel. We're going to find out that he was the quintessential judge. All the right family connections. He did his job. He did it efficiently. We don't find any weaknesses mentioned in Scripture. Number two is Ehud. Now, if you speak a little Hebrew, you know that the first of the 10 digits is Echad, which means one. Why he was called Ehud, which is sort of like number one. Well, you might say, I went to the basketball game, and when we won, everybody put up their finger like this, you know. That's an Ehud. You get it? All right, and then we got number 3 at the time, Shamgar. That's not even a Hebrew word. The question, this is the one that's only recorded in one verse, and then it's mentioned in the poem of Deborah and Barak at the end of our lesson today. Location unknown, notice on the map. And finally, number 4, we have smaller type because we have a double judge. And you've got to say that, because when this is referred to in the book of Samuel and the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, Deborah doesn't appear. It's Barak. And there's something going on here. And when we go into the story, we'll find out. There was a lessening of spiritual carefulness going on, so that with each succeeding judge you had, something that wasn't quite up to snuff. And when in the poem of Deborah and Barak it says, when the men of Israel didn't do their job, God raised up a woman, and she did it. That's still operable today. In fact, Jesus went even beyond that, and he said, if people don't preach the gospel, he'll make the stones talk. You ever hear that? Yeah. So God gets his job done. So these are the ones that we're going to talk about today. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. There you have sin, and there you have a couple of a god on the right and a goddess on the left. She never got any clothes on. It seems that the people who made idols of her liked her naked. And the guy on the right, what do I call him, an abusive husband? He's always got his hand in the air because he's ready to smite somebody. You know what that word means. So, you feared that god. You figure Baal was the god of heaven, the god of the storm, the god that brought rain to impregnate the earth so that crops would grow, the god that made it possible for families to have children. Whereas the other gal, she was sort of a totem for the earth itself, Mother Earth, you've heard that, and that she received the rain from the sky, and she brought crops and fertility and children. Now, it all makes a lot of sense in a pre-scientific age. Why not? And if you find out that you can worship these gods by going to a shrine where they had employees who would service you with sexual favors, you can imagine why the young people of Israel easily were enticed to leave the Lord. Now, the anger of the Lord burned. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. Burned. Whoa. Doesn't give us any details, but when you have fire, you have burn. And he sold them into the hands, and I love this. Can I say it in Hebrew? Kushan Rishlashayim of Aram Naharayim. It's the kind of thing that the kiddos would chant in the background, and it has, Kushan Rishlashayim of Aram Naharayim. Can I translate it freely? Kushan is a black man. Rishathayim means he's doubly wicked. So big, bad, doubly wicked Kushan. And where does he come from? Aram. Aram is the land between the rivers. Naharayim is 2 rivers. So where did he come from? He came up, you see Mesopotamia, Aram between the rivers. And he put the Israelites to trouble for 8 years. At this time in world history, the people in Aram Naharaim were called the Mitanni, and they did make raids. A lot of warfare in those days were just raids. Armies would come in, and they would pillage and take, and they would really muck things up, and then they'd go back home with all the stuff that they had stolen. That's the way things worked. All right, now, when they cried out to the Lord, notice that the people were kind of brought to their senses, and they cried out, and he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. Caleb, anybody remember him? He had a partner, one of the two spies that said, the Lord has given us this land, we can take it. While the other 10 said, no way, they're too big, they're too strong, it's impossible. So he's got good theological connections. Notice that. And he saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. We don't always hear that the Spirit comes on people, but with Othniel, the first judge, we do, and with Samson, the last judge, we do. And they were worlds apart as far as their credentials. And yet, we rejoice in hearing that Samson died serving the Lord. All the rest of his life, not something that you hold up for your children. We'll get to Samson eventually. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, and the land had peace for 40 years. That is about the shortest little sketch covering the 8 years of being under the thumb and the 40 years. Already we're making a leap almost into a half century later. But the land had rest. Othniel is his name. His father-in-law was Caleb. He was one of the people who actually was older than all the other Israelites. Remember, they were all to die in the wilderness. Caleb was an exception because of his faithfulness. So was Joshua, those two. His wife was Achsah. Othniel got a wife. You maybe missed it in the last lesson, but Caleb says, if somebody is strong enough to take this little town called Devere, I'll give him my daughter. This is sort of like out of what you used to tell fairy tales, If you win the war, you get the king's daughter. So, and he came from a very good family. He was from the tribe of Judah. Remember, Judah was the first to go up and was supposed to be the leader. Well, we aren't going to hear that again. But this is the beginning. You might say judges were doing fairly well. The enemy was the doubly wicked black guy. We have to be careful as Americans because we're all burdened with all of the history of slavery in America, and we all know about racism, and it's in the news all the time. People in the ancient world were aware of the way people looked, and if you weren't of the same ethnic group, they could say so. And he was from the land of the two rivers. Some scholars say Edom. I don't think so. So here we have cycle number 1. They served the Baals and the Asherahs. 7 years of oppression. And then they called out, and God raised up Othniel, and you have rest for 40 years. But sadly, when Othniel was gone and his generation passed, the people slunk back into their idolatrous ways. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord because all right, who's the new oppressor? Eglon. That's a funny word, not to you, but if you know Hebrew it is. It means baby calf. We're going to find out that he's a huge one. Nothing baby about him. But as soon as parents taught their children the story about Eglon, and they said that word, you could just hear the titters going around the room. We know better. he got some assistance. It wasn't just one. Ammonites and the Amalekites also lived in the area, and they ganged up on Israel. And you can see there, Moab is by the Dead Sea, and they, their power extended into 18 years. Whoop, we don't want to miss that one. The Israelites cried out again. All right, they're doing the right thing. Good for you. He gave them a deliverer. This guy, Ehud, number one. Now the Bible says, your English Bible will say a left-handed man. And elsewhere in the Bible we know that the Benjamites, from whom he came, were especially skilled in being left-handed slingers. It's not a TV. But remember David? Goliath? And he let the thing and it hit him. All right, that's a slinger. And the Benjamites were very good at left-handed slinging. Now, if you get an army together, you got some on the right flank and some on the left flank. But actually, the word in Hebrew is restricted as to his right hand. It doesn't say left-handed. It says restricted as to his right hand. Now, I personally feel, and I have since I wrote the commentary on Judges, that this was not accidental. Ehud was a cripple. He was restricted in regard to his right hand. Because when he goes in to see the king of Moab, don't think those people were stupid. They usually frisked somebody who came in. Well, you get this guy who comes in like this. You probably did him a pat down real without too much concern. But he's nothing to worry about. And that's the key to how the story unfolds. The Israelites sent him, so they appointed this guy with the restricted right hand to bring tribute to the king of Moab, who is, the Bible says, an extremely fat man. Now, Ehud strapped a 18-inch blade to his right thigh. All right? Now, if you know drawing in the Old West, the drawing a sword from the, no, but like this, whoosh, that worked. You got to get the picture here. The kids all knew this. They understood it. There he is. There he is, the little calf. And he presented the tribute. And the king was a very fat man. Storytelling in ancient Israel was rife with puns, plays on words, and things that would catch the attention and hold the attention of the kiddos. A lot of Bible was not read off of a printed page, but was recited by heart by the fathers and mothers. All right, so after Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent away his assistants. Whoop, too fast. But on reaching the stone images near Gilgal, nobody knows what this is. But remember, we're going to go ripping through 200 years, and you're going to have these details, and you won't have any way of understanding what it means. And Ehud said, I'm going to go back and see the king. I have a secret message for you. The Lord worked it out so that this was enticing enough that the king allowed it. Not everybody would. There was a chance involved in this. No, too fast. And the king told everybody that was in the room, this guy's got a secret message for me. Am I worried about him? Not really, because he's restricted as far as his right hand. And he said to the king, I have a message from God for you. An 18-inch message. He drew the sword from his right thigh and plunged it into that fat belly. Now, every culture has a level of squeamishness that it respects, because otherwise people say, that makes me uncomfortable. We do too. On a scale from 1 to 10, Americans are, I would say, a 6 as far as being sensitive about prudish things. The Germans are a little less so. My wife has taught me that. They like their scatological jokes. Well, there's something going to go on here that only somebody who lived in a rural culture who slaughtered animals is going to understand. How many of you actually were present at the butchering of farm animals? Okay, what happens when the animal is put down? Yeah, I know, but the sphincter muscle, you know what that is? That's the place that keeps our junk inside of us, relaxes, and usually you're going to have a load on the floor. Now, if you've butchered animals, you know this is true. Well, the little calf was being butchered. And the Bible makes it very clear that what happened is his sphincter muscle relaxed and there was a load on the floor. And this is part of the story, because they closed the doors. And the soldiers outside were ashamed to go in because they thought their king was in his private room doing his duty. They could smell it. What they didn't know is he was dead. And gave Ehud enough time to get out and to escape. Yeah, there it is. Verse 22. His bowels discharged. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed over the 18 inches. Ay, ay, ay. Yeah. And now if you know the Hebrew, it's even a little bit more graphic. It's that the point of the sword ended up at the end of our alimentary canal. So not only did he lose everything on the floor, he got tickled right down there. And that's all in the story. But we don't have to dwell on that. Ehud went out to the porch, he shut the doors and locked them. And the servants said, he must be relieving himself. You get it? See, they thought they couldn't go in because, well, he's king. When the king does his business, that's private. They waited to the point of embarrassment. But when he did not open the doors, they took the key and unlocked them, and there they saw their Lord fallen in his filth on the floor. And when Ehud got out, he went up, and you got to understand that the king of Moab had moved across the Jordan River and put up his headquarters in the ruins of Jericho, which in this story is called the City of Palms. It's an oasis. And right behind it are high mountains, which the New Testament are called the Mount of Temptation, where Jesus was tempted of Satan. And he went up, he blew the trumpet, the shofar. I didn't bring one along with me. Shofar. Have you ever heard that? All right. Well, it was a way to call people to the battle. Now, this is funny, if you know Hebrew. What happened with the Moabites, who were on the wrong side of the Jordan, with their king dead, lying in his filth? They tried to get away, just like in the old Westerns. And they had to cross the River Jordan. And the Bible says they were all fat men. So they all imitated their king. And the way it's presented is that the Israelites stood at the fords of the Jordan with their 18-inch blades ready. And as these guys went across the river, pop, 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 they cut them down. But the language is like you pop a balloon, because they're all fat. Storytelling. Storytelling. There's a little graph and a summary of this particular, and I have it. Some heroes are handicapped but resourceful. strap your sword on your right side because you have to use your left hand. That's clever. Resourceful. Number 6, the warriors came down from the hills to seize the fords of the Jordan and cut down the leaderless Moabites trying to escape back to their home country. 2 judges. We're not even out of chapter 3 yet. And now the Bible says 80 years rest. Now if you look at that timeline that I gave you, I think last week, you'll notice that if you look up at the Egyptian pharaohs at this time, and the Egyptians still exercised a whole lot of control over the valleys and plains. The pharaoh that was ruling at this time was Ramses II. And if you get into Egyptian history, he is a big shot. No question about it. So I think Ehud, the hornet, the pharaoh, was keeping things down in the valleys and plains, and Ehud was making sure that up in the villages among the hillbillies things were okay. 80 years. And here's a little map of the ancient Near East and what was going on at this time. We talk about climate change today. If you are an honest archaeology, you know that there have been cycles of climate change since recorded history began. This is nothing new. And around 1200 before Christ, there was a shift in the climate where the Sahara got drier and the various peoples in the Mediterranean started to move around, and the records of the Egyptians mention people called the Sea Peoples, and included in them are the Peleshet, which is the same as Hebrew Pelishtim, which is the same as the English Philistines. And so they came down at this time. Dr. Brugge from our seminary wrote his dissertation on the history of the Philistines. It's very interesting. He has been embraced as a man who saw ahead of his times, and usually scholars try to make things neat and clean, but you know, Philistines are mentioned in the book of Genesis, which critics of the Bible say, well, that was impossible. We know they didn't come until 1200 before Christ. Oh yeah, the Philistines were around for a long time. And Dr. Brugge demonstrated that. But this was a time when they were really on the move, and they moved the blue line by sea, and the green line they moved by land. And you see up there the Hittite Empire? They brought the Hittite Empire to an end when their capital city fell at this time. And they came down to a city named Ugarit. If you're a scholar, you know Ugarit has bequeathed to us thousands of tablets that tell us about the Canaanite religion, very useful for Bible scholars. That city was destroyed by these sea peoples moving down. So it was a tumultuous time, something like when the barbarian invasions came into the Roman Empire and brought the Western Empire to an end. Just a parallel, similar. Now, here's the one verse. After Ehud came Shamgar, son of Anath. Anath, by the way, she's a goddess. This verse has generated lots and lots of papers. Shamgar is not a Hebrew word. Closest we can tell is it's Hurrian, that's another language. And what's he doing? Well, God could use people from anywhere to deliver Israel. And when Ehud, it was rest for 80 years, but Ehud probably didn't live that long. Shamgar kept things in order, and he did it very cleverly with, what's he holding in his hand? It's a word that appears only once in the Bible, so it's anybody's guess exactly what his weapon is. King James Bible said an ox goad. An ox goad, if you've ever been on the farm and you have to move cattle from the back 40, you probably have a stick in your hand because there's always going to be one cow that has to eat the clover over here, and you goad them back into the path so you get them back into the barn. Well, all right, this one shows that it was really a metal weapon. We don't know. But the Bible, the Holy Spirit says he too saved Israel. It doesn't say he was like Othniel, married to the good woman from the right tribe. In fact, we don't know any tribe that he came from. But he also delivered Israel. Period. That's it. Very interesting time. So here we have the cycle, number 2. Moab. All right. It's a cycle. This is going to recur 7 times in our class. And then Shamgar sort of is a asterisk at the end of this 80-year period. He pitched in and helped too. So now we finally get to chapter 4. All of those. There's 3 judges in 1 chapter, and we're moving ahead fast. We've got 40 years, 80 years, 18 years of oppression, 8 years of oppression, and now we have the simple statement: the Israelites again did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he sold them into the hands of Yavin, Jabin. Yavin is Hebrew. He's mentioned also in the book of Joshua. It seems like he's a little bit like the kings of France. You know, they're all Louis. Louis the I, Louis the II, Louis the XIV, Louis the XV. See, if you were a king of France, you were a Louis. I don't know any other country. There are other countries that do that same kind of thing. And Yavin, or Jabin, was defeated by Joshua at his capital city of Hatzor. And it seems that there was another one from this dynasty around the year, we're getting close to into the 1200s now. And he's a local Canaanite guy, and he got the coalition together, and they were giving the Israelites a hard time. Sisera was the commander of the army. This Yavin, we never hear about him except that he's on the throne. And he had 900 chariots. Just imagine. These are 900 battle tanks. And Haroshet Hagoyim is where, and that really means when a smith has an office and he makes iron implements, what do you call that? Blacksmith headquarters. Well, that's what a Haroshet Hagoyim, the blacksmith shop of the Gentiles. Where exactly it is, we don't know. But obviously they were smelting iron. This is that shift to this new technology. And he had that many chariots. Pretty hard to withstand. Now, Deborah, she's called a prophet, the wife of Lapidot. Can I translate that for you? Lightning bolts. Her husband's name was Lightning Bolts. She liked punchy men, I guess. She led Israel at that time, and she led them not from her home turf, but between Bethel and Ramah, down in the tribal area of Bethlehem. And her particular place for judgment was under a palm tree called the Palm of Deborah. Now, we don't know where that is. Trees don't last forever. Nobody will ever know exactly. Well, she sent for the most credentialed soldier of the Israelite nation, whose name Barak. We had a president with that name. And do you know what that means? It means lightning. So she had a husband who was lightning bolts, and she sent for a general named Lightning, only he wasn't. He wasn't the guy who was quick on the trigger like a lightning bolt. He was just the opposite. Mount Tabor is one of the most interesting features of the Holy Land. There you have a picture of it. And she sent for Barak, and she told him to take 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun. This would be up north. Deborah is judging down in the area of Benjamin. And there is in this valley an intermittent stream called the Kishon. When I say intermittent, how many live in the southwest? You know what an arroyo is? Tell me what an arroyo is.
It's usually a drying stream bed, but when the rains come, then it becomes a stream.
Watch out, right? Yeah, a flash flood can fill these dry riverbeds till they are treacherous. And that's part of the story here. God would send a fearful storm that would turn the Kishon into an arroyo with a flash flood in it. And I'll tell you, if you have a chariot, even with iron wheels, in the middle of a flash flood, guess what? Neutralizes it. That's part of the story. Barak said to Deborah, boy, is he a brave guy. You just let that sink in. You know, sometimes preachers want to preach on the responsibilities of men and women according to Scripture, and the Bible does say he gives men the responsibility for a lot of things. But if they don't do their job, I've said it, I'm saying it again, there's nothing wrong with the woman filling the gap, filling the vacuum. And it's exactly what Deborah did. She says, certainly I'll go with you. But you know something? When the war is over, you're not going to get any applause, Mr. Lightning. And so Deborah went with Barak to a place called Kadesh. Kadesh means holy. There probably was a shrine there. And that Barak summoned Naphtali and Zebulun, 10,000 men, just like she said, and Deborah went up with them. Whoop, 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 whoop. Now, Heber the Kenite, all of a sudden we get this guy coming into the story. The Kenites were relatives of Moses' father-in-law, and one of their men, Hobab, was a scout when they came into the Promised Land, and they settled around the city of Jericho. And remember, Haroshet Hagoyim, this is the smithy place of the Canaanites. He seemed to have been in league with the king of the Canaanites, probably did some smithy work. And, all right, part of the story. When they told Sisera summoned from Harosheth Goyim, that place where they made these iron chariots, all his men and 900 chariots fitted with iron. Militarily speaking, this is going to be a bloodbath. And the Israelites were up on Mount Tabor. This place looks nude right now. I think I told you that during the Turkish period, they cut down all the trees to make the engines go on the Hijaz to Mecca railway. In various, almost modern times. In ancient times, these mountains were covered with trees. And so in those trees were the men of Zebulun and Naphtali, waiting for the signal to swoop down into the valley and meet the onslaught of the Canaanites. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots. Doesn't tell us a lot of details. There's a song that's going to come up, Song of Deborah and Barak, where it talks about the rains falling and the Kishon overflowing and everything going nuts. And so we got some of the details from that story. Sisera figured he was not going to escape this battle, so he took to his feet and started running away. Now we meet, remember Deborah says, you're not going to get any of the applause for this victory. There's a gal named Yael. It's just like Giannis, spelled with a J, G, right? But we all know Giannis Antetokounmpo. And so Yael with a Y is pronounced like a Y. Yael, she's a gal. She went out to meet Sisera. Remember, he's running away. He's trying to get away, probably back to the king. And she says, come on in to my house. Don't be afraid. And he says, give me a glass of milk. And she says, and stand in the doorway and tell me if anybody's coming. And Yael picked up a tent peg. Can you imagine what that is? You don't have to know exactly. If you ever gone camping, you got little ones. This is a big one. When you had a tent peg for an Israelite tent, and a hammer, and she quietly went to him as he was lying down, ready to be grossed out. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground. Now who's doing this? Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, who had been working for the enemy making chariots. Along comes Barak, Mr. Lightning. First man on the scene, right? Nope. And they opened the tent and they said, there's your enemy, dead as a doornail. On that day, God subdued Yavin, king of Canaan. The Israelites pressed harder and harder. This wasn't done in a day. The struggle went on. And see, there's a lot of things here where we don't have precision, like we would like to have the newsreels like we do from the Second World War, when you have war in the Pacific and you see Midway and all that stuff. We don't have all that detail. On that day, Deborah and Barak sang this song. Now, this is one of the most interesting, this chapter 5 of Judges is a poem that was meant to be sung. Its language is archaic. Do you know what that means? Yeah, it's like in the middle of reading your newspaper, you get a passage written in Elizabethan Shakespearean English. Well, it tells us something as students of the Bible. This event, which was celebrated in song, was so precious to the people of Israel that even though they would update their translations of Holy Scripture by putting in modern words, and we have examples, the Scripture itself says that they did that, they would not mess with these songs. It's just like I go to Lutheran churches and we have, everything is contemporary except you get to the Lord's Prayer. And there you get ETHs at the end of words. And now there's nothing wrong. You can say it in Elizabethan English or you can say it in modern English. But we just to show you that goes on, this goes on inside the Bible too. If you don't know Hebrew, you wouldn't see it. But this particular chapter has a lot of archaic words, words that had fallen out of use, some words that we have to guess about its meaning. But it comes from this time, and it comes from Deborah, and it comes from Barak. Now I'm going to read some of it. Hear this, you kings. Listen, you rulers. This is typical of poetry back then. I, even I, will sing to the Lord. I will praise the Lord, the God of Israel, in song. When you, Lord, went out from Seir, that's Edom, and the Israelites came out of Edom. When you marched from the land of Edom, the earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds poured down under, the mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. There is a certain meter to this, a certain lilt to this. Use of a poetic phrases repeated. And they start out by saying, we know who our God is. He's the one who led us out of the wilderness to the promised land. And he's the one who's there to be called upon in time of trouble. In the days of Shamgar, that's the other place that it appears in the Bible, but doesn't tell us any more about him. The highways were abandoned. The travelers took the winding paths. Villagers in Israel would not fight. They held back until I, Deborah, arose. She's not bashful. The men were not doing their job. God chose new leaders when war came to the city gates. But not a shield or spear was seen among the 40,000 in Israel. There's that word 40 again, which means a whole lot. And my heart is with Israel's princes, with the willing volunteers among the people. There weren't many volunteers when Deborah began calling lightning to fight this battle. You who ride on white donkeys, by the way, that's you got Palm Sunday, Jesus the King coming into Jerusalem. Riding on a white donkey meant royal. Sitting on your saddle blankets, consider the voice of the singers at the watering places. At the watering places is where you sang this song. People would get it, hey, Dad, sing us the song of Deborah. And everybody would gather around the watering place and they'd sit down and then they would look eagerly for the story. Wake up, Deborah, wake up, break out in song. Arise, Barak. Oh, yeah, you notice only once he's kind of sleeping there in the corner. Take captive your captive, son of Abinoam. That's his father's name. The remnant of the nobles came down, the people of the Lord. Some came from Ephraim. Benjamin was among the people who followed you. So there were people that answered the call of Deborah. From Machir, that's another word for Manasseh. From Zebulun, from the princes of Issachar, they were with Deborah. Yes, Issachar was with Barak. All right. Remember, Barak says, if you go, I will go. He wasn't a complete failure. That's why he appears in the book of Hebrews among the heroes of ancient Israel. Barak, he does. Also appears in the book of 1 Samuel. The districts of Reuben, there was much searching of heart. Should we go? Should we not go? Why do you stay among the sheep? In the districts of Reuben, there was much searching of heart. Gilead state, these are the tribes who did not answer the call to battle. Dan, why did you linger by the ships? The people of Zebulun risked their lives, Naphtali, on the terraced fields. Oh yeah, kings came, they fought. The kings of Canaan fought at Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They took no plunder of silver from the heavens. The stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The river Kishon swept them away. There was a rainstorm, a arroyo that turned the battle. The age-old river, the river Kishon. March on, my soul, be strong. Then thundered the horses' hooves, galloping, galloping. This is meant, the words are chosen to bring up pictures in the eyes of the children and people listening. Curse Meroz, nobody knows where that is, but they obviously were not very good. Said the angel of the Lord, curse the people bitterly because they did not come to help the Lord. Most blessed of women will be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, the blessed of tent-dwelling women. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. In a bowl fit for nobles, she brought him curdled milk. Her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera. She crushed his head. This is going to be staccato Hebrew. Bing, 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 like this. At her feet, he sank. He fell. There he lay. At her feet, he sank. He fell. There he sank. There he fell. The kids were all sitting around the watering holes. They knew exactly when to say that word. Now, this is a poignant thing. Through the window, Sisera's mother. Sisera is that general. If you read the Hebrew, it's like somebody becoming a blubbering idiot. She's muttering to herself, why is his chariot so long in coming? Why is the clatter of the chariots delayed? The wisest of her ladies answer her. She keeps saying to herself, are they not finding and dividing the spoils? A woman or two for each man, colorful garments, a plunder for Sisera, colorful garments embroidered, highly embroidered garments. She thought she would be welcoming home her son with a great victory, and what she's found that, she's going to find out that he's dead with a tent peg through his temple. The poem ends, so may all your enemies perish, Lord, but may all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. 4 judges, 1 hour, 210 years we've covered. And rest is going to become harder and harder. Next week we're going to come to the middle cycle. We've had 3 cycles. We'll have the 4th one. And the guy, ever hear of Gideon? Say that's Hebrew. Forgive me because I just love the Hebrew sound. Gideon. Gideon means hacker. Yeah, they give out Bibles. Hacker. If you play basketball, you know how there's this guy who's always fouling? He's hacking. This is Gideon. He's going to get another name, Jerubbaal, or Jerubbaal, which means he fights with Baal. And the implication is that Baal had become, Baal worship, the worship of this storm god, this god of masculinity, the guy with his hand in the sky, the one ready to smite everyone, had become very powerful. Remember, we moved ahead 200 years. So come back next week and we're going to hear the story of Gideon. We'll close with prayer. Sometimes it may seem that no one is on the Lord's side, that the enemies of truth and faith have the upper hand. This is not new. It was true in the time of the judges. And we can see by these stories that God could raise up people who were restricted as to their right hand. He could raise up people who had strong family connections. He could raise up a woman to get a man to do his job. There are many lessons for us to be learned, but the main one is that when God fights for us, we need not be afraid. Those of you who have not worshiped will hear a fine sermon from the pastor about the Apostle Paul, who felt that life was going against him. He had a thorn in the flesh. But the answer that God gave is the answer he gives to all of us. My grace is sufficient because my strength is perfected in your weakness. May we never forget that for Jesus' sake. Amen. Got it in time this time.